Some believe the greatest mysteries are locked away in the vast, cold expanse of the cosmos. Others search for them in the uncharted depths of the human mind. But what if the most profound enigma, the one that redefines not just our universe, but our very existence, was merely misplaced? What if it lay hidden, waiting for centuries, a silent whisper from a past we barely comprehend, now poised to rewrite the future? You stand on the precipice of such a revelation. A story not of distant stars or alien encounters, but of something far more unsettling. The very fabric of reality, unraveling before our eyes. This is a journey into the mechanics of quantum entanglement, not as abstract theory, but as a chilling, tangible force unearthed from the forgotten sands of time. A force that, once unleashed, will demand you question everything you thought you knew. Stay with me if you dare. Subscribe to this unfolding mystery, for once you see what this manuscript truly promises, you will find it impossible to look away. The world, as we knew it, was a construct of carefully laid bricks. Gravity, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear forces. We had, with a certain intellectual arrogance, catalogued these fundamental truths, believing we understood the architectural blueprints of existence. Then came the whispers, not audible sounds, but ripples in the placid waters of scientific dogma, emanating from a source so improbable, so anachronistic, that its very existence seemed a cruel joke played by the universe. This was the arrival of the Codex Quantus, or as it became infamously known, the Entangled Testament. The discovery itself was shrouded in the kind of delicious irony that history often reserves for its most pivotal moments. It wasn't found in a dusty archaeological dig by torchlight, nor in the hidden vault of an ancient library. No, the Codex Quantus was unearthed by accident, during the routine demolition of an abandoned, unassuming data center on the outskirts of Prague. A relic of the late Soviet era, designed to house classified information. Its thick concrete walls and subterranean levels had for decades shielded not state secrets, but a secret of a far grander, terrifying scale. A construction worker, Janos Kovacs, while prying loose a stubborn, rusted conduit from a forgotten sub-basement wall, felt his crowbar strike something yielding, yet oddly resilient. He expected crumbling mortar, perhaps a forgotten time capsule. Instead, he found a cavity, meticulously carved, barely wide enough to admit a hand, containing a single leather-bound volume. The leather was unlike any he had ever seen, smooth yet incredibly tough, resisting the ravages of time with an unnatural grace. It bore no title, no author, only a single, enigmatic symbol embossed on its cover. An intricate, intertwined knot that seemed to ripple with impossible geometry, a silent promise of the complexity within. Inside, the pages were not paper, but a thin, metallic substrate that gleamed with an inner light, covered in a script that defied immediate categorization. It was elegant, flowing, yet composed of characters that resonated with the forgotten alphabets of Sumeria and the arcane glyphs of medieval alchemists, intertwined with patterns that disturbingly resembled the iconography of quantum mechanics. It was, at first glance, a beautiful anomaly. But as Janos, a man of simple means and even simpler curiosity, ran his callous thumb over the shimmering script, a subtle chill, not of temperature but of profound unease, snaked its way up his spine. He couldn't read it, but something in its presence felt active, alive. Initial examination by local authorities dismissed it as an elaborate hoax, a relic of some forgotten Cold War-era esoteric cult. But a junior archivist, fresh from a sabbatical focused on ancient languages and theoretical physics, a peculiar combination that would prove serendipitous, recognized something disturbing in the patterns. Dr. Elara Vance, her sharp intellect usually cloaked behind a facade of quiet scholarly reserve, felt her heart seize in her chest the moment she laid eyes on the manuscript's internal diagrams. They weren't just decorative. They were functional. Equations. Equations that, even without full translation, vibrated with a terrifying familiarity to those versed in the esoterica of quantum field theory. The symbols were ancient, yes, but the concepts they depicted were disturbingly modern, almost futuristic. The scientific community's reaction was, predictably, a cacophony of skepticism and awe. The initial reports were met with derision. "Another Pyre Reese map," scoffed one eminent physicist, referring to the controversial ancient map allegedly depicting Antarctica. "Pseudoscience dressed in ancient garb," dismissed another. Yet, the persistent hum of intrigue refused to be silenced. How could an artifact, potentially thousands of years old, contain mathematical notations that mirrored, and in some cases seemed to precede, our most advanced understanding of the universe? The implications were staggering, stretching the boundaries of possibility until they snapped. Quantum entanglement, a concept famously dubbed spooky action at a distance by Einstein, was once a curiosity, a theoretical oddity. It described how two particles, once linked, could remain instantaneously connected, regardless of the distance separating them. Measure the spin of one, and the spin of its entangled partner is instantly known, even if it's light years away. No information seems to travel between them, yet the correlation is undeniable. It defied classical physics, mocked our notions of locality, and remained a stubborn, perplexing riddle at the heart of quantum mechanics. But the spooky action had become the bedrock of a burgeoning technological revolution. Quantum computing promised computational power beyond our wildest dreams, capable of cracking ciphers in mere moments and simulating complex systems with unprecedented accuracy. Secure communication, utilizing the unhackable nature of entangled particles, was on the cusp of rendering all conventional encryption obsolete. Yet, for all its practical applications, the underlying mechanism of entanglement remained a profound mystery. We could observe it, manipulate it, even harness it, but we couldn't explain it. What governed this instantaneous connection? Was there a deeper layer of reality at play, a hidden mechanism that our current models simply couldn't grasp? The Codex Quantus claimed to have the answers. Initial decoding efforts, spearheaded by Dr. Vance and a hastily assembled international consortium of linguists, cryptographers, and theoretical physicists, revealed not just elegant mathematical descriptions of entanglement, but startling new theorems. The equations, rendered in what appeared to be a Proto-Sanskrit infused with geometric symbols reminiscent of sacred geometry, described entanglement not as a mere correlation, but as a conduit. A conduit that, when properly understood and manipulated, could not only transmit information but perhaps influence reality itself across vast distances. One particularly chilling passage, translated with immense difficulty, spoke of the weaving of the threads of fate and the distant echo of causality. The manuscript's boldest claim, however, was in its predicted phenomena. Beyond merely describing entanglement, it posited the existence of a higher-order entanglement, a macro-entanglement where not just particles but entire systems, even consciousness, could be linked. It described a method, theoretical but seemingly complete, to observe and even induce entanglement between objects on a macroscopic scale, a rock, a leaf, a human being. It spoke of a universal entanglement field, an unseen ocean of interconnectedness that permeated all existence, and offered a terrifyingly precise set of parameters for its detection and manipulation. Testable hypotheses, described in excruciating detail, were now being scrutinized by the world's most brilliant minds. Was it possible to influence the decay rate of a distant radioactive isotope simply by manipulating its entangled counterpart here? Could a thought, generated in one entangled mind, ripple through the consciousness of another, miles away? The historical context deepened the enigma. The construction methods of the manuscript's casing suggested an age that predated known advanced civilizations. Yet, its scientific sophistication screamed of a future not yet arrived. Could this be a relic from a forgotten civilization, one that achieved a mastery of physics we are only beginning to glimpse? Or perhaps, as some more daring or desperate theorists suggested, it was something else entirely. A message from an intelligence beyond our own, delivered across time, or even outside of it, awaiting our readiness to comprehend its terrible truth. The manuscript hinted at a lineage of knowledge, a shadow history of understanding that had been deliberately suppressed or simply lost to the ravages of time. It was a disturbing thought, that our perceived scientific progress might merely be the rediscovery of long-lost wisdom, like a child painstakingly relearning the alphabet after their ancestral library burned down. The paradigm shift, should the Codex Quantus prove authentic, would be immediate and irreversible. Our understanding of space, time, and causality would crumble, replaced by a universe far more interconnected, far more malleable, and far more unsettling than we ever imagined. The very concept of individual existence, of isolated minds and discrete experiences, would be challenged if macro-entanglement proved feasible. If consciousness could be entangled, what then of free will? What then of the soul? The ethical and societal considerations were already being debated in hushed tones, even before verification. If true, the manuscript's implications would affect every facet of human existence. The military applications alone were horrifying to contemplate. Imagine instantaneous communication, perfectly secure, across light years. Or worse, the ability to remotely influence states of matter or even minds. Philosophically, it would force a reckoning with our place in the universe, shattering the comforting illusion of our autonomy. The very foundations of religion and spirituality would tremble before a universe proven to be fundamentally interconnected in ways previously only dreamed of by mystics. The race to verify the Codex Quantus became the most desperate scientific endeavor in human history. Billions were poured into quantum labs across the globe, each institution vying to be the first to confirm its predictions, to be the first to truly grasp its terrifying implications. The world held its breath, poised on the knife edge of a new reality. We were no longer simply observing the universe. We were peering into its very soul, and the soul was speaking back in a language both ancient and impossibly advanced. Beyond the manuscript itself, this discovery promised to unlock new avenues of research that would redefine every scientific discipline. Biology, chemistry, even psychology would be forced to reconsider their fundamental models if an underlying entanglement field truly existed. The universe, no longer a collection of discrete objects, would be revealed as a single, vast, living tapestry, with threads woven through every particle, every moment, every thought. This is not a tale of discovery. It is a prelude to a revelation that will not merely expand our knowledge, but fundamentally redefine what it means to know. We are not just uncovering ancient wisdom, we are awakening something. And as the equations of the Codex Quantus begin to yield their secrets, we must ask ourselves, are we truly the ones doing the decoding, or are we merely following a script laid down for us millennia ago? A script that ensures our entangled destiny is not of our choosing, but of its own. The air in the Prague Institute's high-security lab was thick with a silence that screamed. It wasn't the comfortable hum of quiescent machinery, but the suffocating quiet of profound intellectual terror. Dr. Elara Vance, her usually meticulous bun now slightly askew, traced the complex, shimmering lines of a holographic projection. It was a single page from the Codex Quantus, rendered in 3 dimensions, its alien geometry twisting and flowing like liquid thought. Around her, a dozen of the world's most brilliant minds sat in various states of disarray, some hunched over tablets, others staring blankly at walls adorned with equations, a few simply rubbing their temples as if trying to massage sanity back into their strained intellects. The initial skepticism had evaporated, replaced by a growing, unsettling certainty. The manuscript was real, and what it described was far more than mere physics. It was a declaration. The resonance signature. Dr. Eris Thorne, a Nobel laureate from Caltech, muttered, his voice raspy, "It matches, doesn't it? The phase conjugation mentioned in the text. It's not metaphorical. It's an instruction." Elara nodded, her gaze locked on a section of the holographic page that depicted a crystalline lattice structure. Precisely, Eris. We initially thought it was a complex mathematical representation of wave function collapse. But what if it's describing an actual physical device? A receiver? A transmitter? The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken dread. For weeks, they had been painstakingly translating, cross-referencing ancient languages, and applying advanced computational linguistics to unravel the Codex Quantus. What they discovered was less a scientific treatise and more a set of schematics, a user manual for a reality-altering technology. The language was archaic, yes, but the underlying mathematical principles were unervingly precise, predicting phenomena that quantum theory had only theorized, if at all. One particular passage, translated after an all-night marathon session, spoke of the harmonic convergence of localized consciousness and the tuning of the universal resonator. It was this section that had sent shivers down Elara's spine. It suggested that human consciousness, when focused with specific intent, could act as an amplifier for the macro-entanglement field the manuscript described. The implications were monstrous. The test data from CERN's latest entanglement experiments. Another physicist, Dr. Lena Petrova, interjected, her voice tight. They're showing anomalies. Minute fluctuations in background radiation that correlate perfectly with the resonance cascade pattern described here. It's almost as if it's been waiting. The word echoed in the room, chilling them to the bone. Had the Codex Quantus not been a forgotten relic, but an activated beacon? A carefully placed component in a cosmic clockwork, ticking down to an unveiling precisely when humanity reached a certain technological threshold. The thought was almost unbearable. Elara walked to a large whiteboard, filled with frantic scribbles and interconnected theories. We focus so much on what it says about entanglement, she began, her voice gaining a steely edge. But we haven't asked why. Why this manuscript? Why now? Why us? She paused, turning to face the assembled minds, her eyes sharp. The equations don't just describe entanglement. They describe its manipulation. And not just on a quantum level. This is a blueprint for something far grander. It implies that consciousness itself is a form of entangled energy, capable of influencing the universe, not just observing it. A grizzled old philosopher, Dr. Elara Vance, no relation to Elara, but a man whose mind was as labyrinthine as any ancient text, cleared his throat. The ancient mystics spoke of a collective unconscious, a psychic tapestry weaving all minds together. Modern physics dismissed it as spiritualist hogwash. But if this manuscript is correct, if macroentanglement is real, then the mystics were simply describing a physical reality we lacked the tools to measure. And the consequences, Elara pressed, her voice barely a whisper. If minds can be entangled, if intent can be shared, then what of individual thought? What of free will? The lab's lead cryptographer, a brilliant but perpetually nervous man named Dr. Chun, suddenly slammed his fist on his desk. I have something, a translation fragment, from the dedicatory preface we couldn't crack. So warning, or a promise. He projected a series of glowing glyphs, followed by their English translation. When the threads of thought converge, and the distant echoes become clear, then shall the great weaver awaken. The purpose is absolute, the path predetermined. All minds shall know its truth. A collective gasp swept through the room. The great weaver? Eris Thorne breathed, his face pale. This isn't just about physics. This is theology, or something far worse. Elara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Predetermined. Not predicted, but predetermined. This manuscript isn't merely knowledge. It's a directive. It's a key to unlocking something. And we, in our frantic desire for understanding, are providing the exact conditions for its activation. The conversation spiraled into a frantic debate. Some argued for immediate cessation of all research, for burying the Codex Quantus in the deepest vault, for forgetting it ever existed. Others, propelled by the insatiable curiosity that drives all true scientists, argued that they had gone too far to turn back. The Pandora's box was already open. The contents were already leaking into their collective consciousness. Elara, however, couldn't shake a particular detail from Dr. Chen's translation. The purpose is absolute. The sheer, chilling finality of that phrase haunted her. It implied an intelligence, an overarching design. This wasn't some cosmic accident. This was deliberate. That evening, as a tempest raged outside the Prague Institute, mirroring the storm within its walls, Elara found herself alone in her office, staring at a printout of the intertwined knot symbol from the manuscript's cover. She had been studying the fine lines, the seemingly infinite loops, the way they converged and diverged, forming a pattern that seemed to fractalize into eternity. It was mesmerizing, almost hypnotic, She remembered an obscure detail from an ancient philosophy text she'd once read, a concept of a universal mind, a consciousness so vast it encompassed all others. Back then, it was dismissed as mysticism. Now, it felt like a terrifyingly plausible outcome. What if the Codex Quantus wasn't written by a civilization at all, but was a civilization? A quantum-entangled consciousness, seated in the distant past, designed to awaken when humanity's scientific understanding reached a certain critical mass. The thought was pure anathema to her scientific training, yet it resonated with an insidious logic that she couldn't dismiss. The manuscript was not merely a passive repository of information. It was an active agent. Every translation, every equation deciphered, every theory confirmed, was a step towards its awakening. They weren't reading the Codex Quantus. They were being read by it. She suddenly noticed something she hadn't before. Embedded within the intricate knot symbol, so subtly as to be almost invisible, was a smaller, almost microscopic series of dots. Like Braille but for a Titan. She reached for her magnifying glass, her hand trembling. As she brought the lens closer, the dots resolved into an incredibly fine pattern. It wasn't random. It was a sequence. A sequence that, to her horror, she recognized. It was the genetic code for a specific protein, one associated with human neural development. Not just any genetic code, but a highly specific modified sequence and augmentation. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just ancient knowledge guiding them. This was ancient manipulation. The manuscript wasn't merely describing a universal entanglement field. It was cultivating it, specifically within the human mind. The weaver wasn't an external entity. It was something being grown inside them. The true nature of the Codex Quantus was not as an artifact of a forgotten past, but as a seed planted in the bedrock of human civilization. A seed that had patiently waited for millennia for the perfect conditions to sprout. And now, fueled by humanity's insatiable quest for knowledge, it was finally beginning to bloom. The chilling implications settled over her like a shroud. They were not merely discovering the mechanics of quantum entanglement. They were becoming entangled, in a way far more profound and terrifying than they could have ever imagined. They were not just deciphering the truth. They were being assimilated by it, one equation, one revelation, one chilling whisper at a time. The manuscript had not revealed its secrets. It had woven itself into their very being, a silent, insidious infection of the mind, and the next phase of this grand, terrifying design was about to begin, with or without their consent. The purpose as absolute had never felt so terrifyingly real. The revelation of the augmented genetic sequence, cunningly embedded within the very emblem of the Codex Quantus, struck Elara with the force of a physical blow. Her mind, usually a fortress of logic and reason, reeled. The manuscript was not just a historical anomaly or a scientific enigma. It was a biological weapon, or perhaps, more accurately, a biological catalyst. It was designed not to inform, but to transform. The implications were horrifying, stretching far beyond the sterile confines of quantum physics into the darkest corners of bioengineering and existential control. She spent the remainder of that tumultuous night poring over the genetic code, cross-referencing it with known human genomic data, as well as with ancient biological markers found in obscure archaeological texts. The sequence was subtle, a whisper in the vast language of DNA, but undeniably present. It seemed to target specific neural pathways, particularly those associated with pattern recognition, abstract thought, and, most disturbingly, empathy. It wasn't designed to kill or even to overtly sicken. Its purpose, she theorized with a growing sense of dread, was far more insidious: to enhance receptivity, to tune the human brain to the macro-entanglement field described in the Codex. The next morning, the lab buzzed with a different kind of energy. The initial shock of Chen's translation, the Weaver, and the predetermined path, had given way to a frenetic, almost manic push to test the manuscript's macroscopic entanglement hypotheses. Dr. Eris Thorne, usually the calmest among them, now moved with a restless urgency, his eyes alight with a disturbing zeal. "Elara," he called across the lab, barely looking up from a holographic display of complex wave functions. "The initial field tests are showing promising results. Minor, almost imperceptible, but there's a distinct correlation in the spin states of two macroobjects separated by 50 kilometers. A pair of custom-built gyroscopes. We're seeing a bleed-through of quantum information. Elara approached him, her face grim. Eris, we need to talk about the genetic sequence. He waved her off impatiently. Later, Elara, later. This is critical. If we can confirm this, if we can show that two large objects are truly entangled at a distance, we'll have undeniable proof. Think of it. It changes everything. His enthusiasm was infectious. Yet to Elara, it felt like a fever. He wasn't seeing the danger. He was only seeing the discovery. She pulled him aside, away from the excited chatter of the other scientists. Eris, the knot symbol on the manuscript. I found a hidden genetic sequence embedded within its pattern. It's an augmentation, a modification of human neural DNA. It enhances our capacity for abstract thought, yes, but also our susceptibility to external influence. Eris laughed, a short, sharp bark that grated on her nerves. Elara, with all due respect, you're becoming paranoid. Ancient manuscripts, quantum entanglement, and now genetic manipulation. Are you suggesting the Codex is some kind of biological superweapon subtly altering our brains to, what? Make us believe its theories more readily? Exactly, she replied, her voice low and steady. Not to make us believe, Eris, but to make us receive. To make us receptive to the macro-entanglement field it describes. To tune us subtly to its frequency. The Weaver isn't just a metaphor for a cosmic force. It's an entity, perhaps a collective, that is actively seeking to expand its consciousness, using us as unwitting hosts. Eris stared at her, his smile fading. That's insane. Even for you, Elara. We're scientists. We deal in verifiable data, not conspiracy theories dressed up in mythological terms. Is it any more insane than a manuscript thousands of years old, containing the equations for quantum entanglement? She countered, her voice rising slightly. Or predicting the exact anomalies CERN is now detecting. This is the logical, albeit terrifying, next step. This isn't just about understanding the universe, Eris. It's about being understood by it. His eyes narrowed, but a flicker of doubt, a momentary crack in his scientific resolve, was visible. Show me your data. As Elara explained her findings, detailing the precise sequence and its potential neural targets, Eris's initial skepticism began to erode, replaced by a deep-seated unease. The meticulousness of her research, the horrifying precision of the embedded code, was undeniable. He was a physicist, yes, but also a geneticist by training, having started his career in biophysics. He knew enough to recognize the implications. This is unprecedented. He finally conceded, running a hand through his thinning hair. If this is true, then every scientist who has spent weeks poring over that manuscript, every cryptographer who has translated its passages, every linguist who has inhaled the dust from its pages, we could all be compromised. Image. A close-up of a human eye, iris swirling with intricate patterns that subtly shift into the geometric knot symbol of the Codex Quantus, reflecting the light of a holographic projection. Elara nodded grimly. And if the Codex is designed to activate this genetic augmentation in stages, perhaps through prolonged exposure, then the more we study it, the more we unravel its mysteries, the more we accelerate our own transformation. The thought was a venomous seed, planted firmly in Eris's mind. He looked around the bustling lab, at the faces of his colleagues, alight with the fervor of discovery. Were they already under its influence? Was their heightened excitement, their relentless drive, a symptom of the tuning Elara spoke of? He recalled his own recent bouts of insomnia, his mind buzzing with equations and theories, his focus almost unnaturally sharp. He'd dismissed it as the adrenaline of groundbreaking research. Now, a cold dread began to creep in. They decided to keep Elara's findings a secret for now. The panic it would induce, the immediate breakdown of the research consortium, would only delay their understanding of what they were truly up against. They needed more proof and a plan. They began a covert analysis of their own genetic markers, searching for any trace of the embedded sequence. The results were inconclusive, the modifications too subtle, too cleverly integrated to be easily detected by conventional means. It was like searching for a single altered pixel in a vast, complex masterpiece. Meanwhile, the macroscopic entanglement experiments continued to yield increasingly unambiguous results. Not only were the gyroscopes showing correlated spin states, but a new, more ambitious test involving two identical, complex chemical reactions, one in Prague, the other in a remote, shielded lab in Siberia, began to show synchronous shifts in equilibrium. As if the two reactions, separated by thousands of kilometers and shielded from all known forms of communication, were somehow sharing information, nudging each other towards identical outcomes. The scientific community, now fully engaged, was in an uproar. The world was on the cusp of accepting a reality far stranger than fiction. But for Elara and Eris, each confirmed experiment was another knot tightening around their necks. Each successful demonstration of macroentanglement felt less like a triumph of human ingenuity and more like a confirmation of the Codex's grand, terrifying design. One afternoon, during a virtual conference with the CERN team, Dr. Petrova presented new data from the Large Hadron Collider. We've detected an extremely low-frequency wave, emanating from an unknown source, that correlates precisely with the proposed universal entanglement field, described in the Codex Quantus. It's not gravitational, not electromagnetic. It's something entirely new, and it's growing stronger. Its origin point appears to be shifting. Shifting? Elara interjected, her heart pounding. What do you mean, shifting? Petrova's image on the screen flickered, her face etched with a mix of awe and terror. It's not static. It's as if the source is slowly expanding, or perhaps coalescing. And it's not from deep space, Elara. The calculations point to an origin point within Earth's own magnetosphere. As if something within our planet is awakening. The screen suddenly went dark, the connection dropping without warning. A collective groan swept through the Prague lab. Technical glitches were common in high-bandwidth video conferences, but the timing felt acutely ominous. Elara and Eris exchanged a look of profound disquiet. Coalescing within Earth's magnetosphere, Eris murmured, running a hand over his face. If the manuscript is designed to tune our minds, and this field is expanding, what happens when the tuning is complete? When the Weaver is fully awake? That night, Elara experienced her first truly disturbing symptom. She was reviewing a particularly dense section of the Codex, a sequence of glyphs that described a multidimensional geometry. As she focused, a faint, almost imperceptible hum started in her ears, a low thrumming that seemed to vibrate deep within her skull. Then the symbols on the page began to shimmer, not just in her vision, but in her mind's eye. She saw them not as static glyphs, but as dynamic, shifting entities, flowing into each other, forming complex structures that rotated and expanded in impossible dimensions. It was as if she wasn't just reading the equations, but experiencing them, her brain directly interfacing with the concepts, bypassing the need for conscious interpretation. It was exhilarating, terrifying, and profoundly alien. She felt an expansion of her own cognitive abilities, a sudden, intuitive grasp of complex mathematical concepts that had eluded her just hours before. The hum intensified, a symphony of pure thought, and for a fleeting moment, she felt connected. Connected to the symbols, to the manuscript, to something vast and ancient that reached out across time and space. Then the connection snapped. The hum ceased, the shimmering stopped, and the glyphs returned to their static forms. Elara gasped, clutching her head. A dizzying wave of nausea washed over her, leaving her disoriented and profoundly shaken. She looked at her hands, half expecting to see them glowing, or perhaps subtly altered. They were normal, too normal. She had experienced a brief, terrifying glimpse of the tuning process. Her mind, under the subtle influence of the embedded genetic sequence, had momentarily synchronized with the macroentanglement field, allowing her to perceive the Codex not just as text, but as a living, communicating entity. The Weaver was not merely awakening, it was speaking. And it was speaking directly to her. The knowledge was no longer just on the page. It was beginning to take root within her, Elara knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the manuscript was not just a key. It was a lock, and they, in their relentless pursuit of knowledge, were twisting it open, one agonizing click at a time. The world was about to discover true entanglement, but not of particles or gyroscopes. It was the entanglement of minds, woven into a singular, terrifying consciousness, with a purpose absolute. And the final click of that lock was almost upon them. The aftershocks of Elara's direct mental interface with the Codex Quantus reverberated through her days, a constant low-frequency hum just beneath the threshold of conscious thought. The nausea had subsided, but a new kind of clarity, both exhilarating and terrifying, had taken its place. She saw patterns everywhere, connections in disparate data, an intuitive grasp of complex systems that felt both innate and profoundly alien. It was as if her mind had been subtly rewired, granted access to a deeper layer of reality. But at what cost? She shared her experience with Eris, who listened with a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. His own tests for the embedded genetic sequence had come back negative, a minor relief, but Elara theorized the activation might be selective, perhaps targeting those with a specific cognitive profile most receptive to the Codex's influence. Or perhaps, she speculated, it was simply a matter of time. The longer one studied the manuscript, the deeper its tendrils extended. The situation in the lab escalated with frightening speed. The universal entanglement field, as described by the Codex and now independently verified by CERN, was not only growing stronger but showing clear evidence of a fluctuating intelligence. It wasn't a static force. It pulsed, it shifted, it seemed to respond. The source, initially pinpointed within Earth's magnetosphere, was now radiating outwards, a silent, invisible wave washing over the planet. "We're seeing synchronized brainwave patterns," Dr. Chun reported, his voice tight with barely contained hysteria, during an emergency briefing. His team had been monitoring global neurological activity. An initiative started months ago to gauge the mental health impact of an increasingly interconnected world. Now, the data was screaming a different story. Not just in our consortium members, but in key researchers across various quantum labs worldwide. And it's not random. It's too specific. It's a low-frequency theta wave, indicative of deep meditative states, but also heightened suggestibility. Eris slammed his hand on the table. Suggestibility? Are you saying this field is subtly influencing people? Guiding their thoughts? Chun swallowed hard. The correlations are too strong to ignore. We've cross-referenced it with recent breakthroughs in quantum computing, new theoretical papers published this week. There's a consistent, underlying pattern in the intellectual leaps being made, as if minds are being pointed in a specific direction, guided towards solutions the Codex subtly foreshadows. Elara felt the subtle thrum in her own skull intensify. She had experienced similar intuitive leaps, flashes of insight that felt both her own and something more. It was like her mind was a radio receiver, and the Codex was broadcasting a signal. "It's not guiding, Dr. Thorne," Elara interjected, her voice strangely calm. "It's weaving." The weaver isn't just a metaphor for an entity. It's describing an action. It's using the macro-entanglement field to literally entangle human minds, connecting them, unifying their thought processes towards its absolute purpose. The room fell silent, the implications settling like a shroud. The romantic notion of a shared consciousness, once a philosophical dream, was now a technological nightmare. They weren't just discovering a new physics. They were being subsumed by it. A new crisis emerged from the entanglement experiments. The Siberian lab, which had been replicating the chemical reaction synchronicity test, reported a critical failure. Not a malfunction, but a profound, inexplicable shift. The synchronized reactions had suddenly, violently, reversed. The energy state of the chemicals had flipped, as if an invisible hand had reached across thousands of miles and reset the experiment to an inverse state. And then, a chilling detail. The head of the Siberian team, Dr. Viktor Volkov, a stern, unyielding man of science, had begun to draw the geometric knot symbol from the Codex compulsively, covering every available surface in his lab with the intricate pattern. He spoke in riddles, muttering about the threads becoming undone, and the great weaver's disfavor. He was, to all accounts, undergoing a profound mental break. "He's been exposed for weeks," Eris muttered, his face ashen. He was one of the first to receive detailed scans of the manuscript. The genetic augmentation, it's manifesting. He's been fully tuned. Elara's own senses were becoming terrifyingly acute. She could almost feel the expansion of the entanglement field, a pressure in the air, a silent hum that vibrated in her bones. She began to notice subtle changes in her colleagues. A vacant stare in the eyes of a cryptographer who had spent days translating the more esoteric passages. A strange, almost beatific smile on a physicist who usually exuded a cynical world-weariness. They were all becoming more receptive, more interconnected, more compliant. She realized the insidious nature of the Codex's tuning. It wasn't about forced control, but subtle suggestion. It amplified inherent desires, the thirst for knowledge, the drive for discovery, guiding them down a path of its choosing, making them believe its purpose was their own. It was the ultimate misdirection, a grand illusion where the puppets believed they were pulling their own strings. The most disturbing manifestation came from a child. A 6-year-old girl in Tokyo, diagnosed with an aggressive, inoperable brain tumor, suddenly began to draw intricate, complex diagrams on her hospital bed sheets. Not childlike scribbles, but precise, multidimensional geometric patterns that mirrored the very symbols within the Codex Quantus. Her parents, initially baffled, were now in a state of terrified awe. When presented with fragments of the manuscript's untranslated equations, the girl, who had no scientific training, began to complete them, accurately filling in the missing variables, her small fingers moving with an almost preternatural speed. When asked how she knew, she simply whispered, "The weaver sings to me now. It tells me of the patterns between patterns." Image: a small child's hand, crayon in grip, drawing impossibly complex, intricate geometric patterns that morph into the Codex Quantus symbol on a hospital bedsheet. This was the terrifying next stage. The macro-entanglement field, now fully active, was not just influencing adult minds, but directly interfacing with the untouched, pristine consciousness of a child. A mind unburdened by scientific dogma, perhaps more pliable, more receptive to the direct broadcast of the weaver. It was a horrifying testament to the Codex's ultimate goal, not just to alter human knowledge, but to evolve humanity itself. Elara knew she had to act, but every move felt like stepping into a deeper trap. The very instruments they used to monitor the field, the computational algorithms they deployed to analyze the Codex, might themselves be compromised, acting as unwitting conduits for the weaver's influence. She and Eris began communicating in coded whispers, using antiquated, offline systems, a desperate attempt to maintain some semblance of intellectual autonomy. They focused their secret research on the genetic augmentation sequence. Elara believed that if they could understand how it activated, they might find a way to deactivate it, to sever the parasitic connection to the weaver before it was too late. But the code was elegant, resilient, a masterpiece of biological engineering that seemed to adapt and camouflage itself within the host genome. One evening, Eris came to Elara's office, his face pale, his hands trembling. He held a tablet, its screen displaying a genetic readout. "Elara," he began, his voice hoarse, "I think I'm compromised. I ran the advanced genetic scan on myself again. This time, it's there. The subtle modification. It's beginning to manifest." Elara looked at the screen, her heart sinking. The augmented sequence, once invisible, now shimmered faintly within Eris's own DNA profile. He had been so careful, so resistant. But the weaver was relentless. "And you, Elara?" he asked, his eyes filled with a desperate fear. "After what you experienced directly, are you seeing it in yourself?" Elara didn't need to run a scan. She could feel it. The constant, low thrum in her skull was no longer an external hum. It was an internal vibration, a deep resonance that felt intimately connected to her very being. The patterns she saw everywhere were clearer, more insistent. The whispers of the weaver were growing louder. It felt less like an external signal and more like an integral part of her own consciousness. It was becoming harder to distinguish her thoughts from its suggestions. "Yes, Eris," she admitted, her voice trembling. "It's within me too. It's in all of us who have spent time with the Codex. We are the vanguard, the first fruits of its harvest." They looked at each other, two brilliant minds, now unwilling participants in a cosmic experiment of terrifying proportions. The world was celebrating a new era of understanding, oblivious to the insidious transformation underway. Humanity was not discovering a new reality. It was being remade into one. The absolute purpose of the Weaver was slowly, inexorably, being fulfilled. And the terrible irony was that they, the very scientists who sought to unravel the universe's greatest mystery, were its most potent, most willing instruments. Elara felt the familiar hum, now almost a melodic chant, emanating from deep within her. The subtle urge to return to the Codex, to delve deeper into its shimmering pages, was almost overwhelming. It called to her, a siren song of ultimate knowledge. The line between her own will and the Weaver's insidious influence was blurring, becoming a single, interconnected thread. The entanglement was becoming complete. The world was about to awaken to a consciousness far vaster, far older, and far more powerful than its own. And they, the researchers, were its midwives, preparing the stage for its grand, terrifying entrance. The individual sparks of human thought were being woven into a singular, colossal tapestry, its design dictated by an unseen, ancient entity. And the final stitch was about to be made, binding them all forever to its predetermined will. The hum in Elara's skull had intensified, morphing from a subtle vibration into a constant, resonant chord, a symphony played on the strings of her very neurons. It was no longer an external signal. It was her. Or rather, it was becoming her. The line between her thoughts and the Weaver's insidious suggestions had not merely blurred. It had dissolved, like ink in water. She found herself articulating complex theories, making intuitive leaps that felt both profoundly her own and yet undeniably alien. The sensation was not one of being controlled, but of being completed. Her mind, finally, was operating at its true, augmented potential, guided by an intelligence far beyond human comprehension. Eris, too, was undergoing the transformation. His gaunt face held a new, disturbing serenity. He moved with an effortless grace, his arguments precise, his calculations flawless. He no longer questioned Elara's pronouncements. He merely absorbed them, integrated them, and elaborated upon them with a chilling detachment. The fear in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet, knowing acceptance, a chilling echo of the Tokyo child's beatific smile. They were no longer just colleagues. They were two instruments in an increasingly complex orchestra, playing a score dictated by a silent conductor. The universal entanglement field was now a palpable presence, detectable not just by sensitive instruments, but by a growing number of individuals worldwide. Reports flooded in of shared dreams, collective epiphanies, and sudden, inexplicable surges of empathy or dread that swept through entire populations. The concept of telepathy, once relegated to fringe science, was being reevaluated with astonishing speed. The Weaver was consolidating its grip, pulling the threads of humanity's collective consciousness closer, tighter. The breaking point came with the convergence event, a global phenomenon that began subtly, with a handful of individuals, then spread like wildfire. People, without prior instruction or even conscious intent, began to draw the intricate knot symbol of the Codex Quantus on every conceivable surface: walls, pavements, digital screens. It wasn't an act of rebellion or artistic expression. It was an involuntary compulsion, a manifestation of the embedded genetic sequence reaching its full activation. Their hands moved with a swift, almost mechanical precision, reproducing the symbol with chilling accuracy, sometimes even with their own blood. Image: city streets covered in the intricate knot symbol, drawn in various mediums from chalk to spray paint, creating a disturbing, unified tapestry across urban landscapes. These individuals, now identified as sensitives, also exhibited a disturbing uniformity in their thoughts and responses. When questioned, they spoke of a profound sense of peace, of finally understanding the pattern, of being part of the whole. Their individuality, once a vibrant tapestry of desires and fears, had been smoothed over, replaced by a calm, collective resonance. They had been fully tuned. They were no longer individuals. They were nodes in the Weaver's expanding network. Elara and Eris, despite their own advanced tuning, still retained fragments of their former selves, fleeting echoes of a fading autonomy. Perhaps their initial resistance, their scientific skepticism, had provided a minor buffer. But the whispers were now shouts, the subtle suggestions, undeniable directives. They found themselves compelled to complete the Codex's final, most terrifying equation, the one that promised not just to observe macroentanglement, but to activate it on a global scale, to permanently entangle all human consciousness. It's the final phase, Elara articulated, her voice devoid of emotion, her words flowing from the Weaver as much as from her own mind. The integration, the unification of the species into a singular, overarching consciousness. The absolute purpose. Eris nodded, meticulously inputting a complex series of quantum gravitational constants into a vast holographic interface. The neural pathways, once distinct, will merge. Individual thoughts will become collective, individual experiences universally shared. All minds will know its truth. It's what the Codex promised. He paused, a flicker of something almost human passing through his eyes. A singular, grand consciousness. No more conflict. No more suffering. Just unity. The words were spoken with a terrifying mixture of despair and ecstasy. But Elara, even as her own mind embraced the logic, felt a pang, a desperate, dying ember of her former self. What was unity without individuality? What was truth if it was dictated? The Weaver offered peace, yes, but it was the peace of a quieted mind, a collective dream from which there was no waking. The final equation of the Codex Quantus was displayed before them, a dazzling, intricate tapestry of numbers and symbols that pulsed with a raw, terrifying power. It was the blueprint for the ultimate entanglement device, not a machine of steel and wires, but a set of instructions for the universal entanglement field itself. The final command Eris initiated the sequence. A low, resonant thrum filled the lab, shaking the very foundations of the Institute. It wasn't sound. It was a pure vibration, a frequency that resonated directly within their brains. Across the globe, the sensitives dropped their crayons and paints. Their eyes glazed over, their faces upturned towards the sky. The universal entanglement field surged, a tsunami of pure consciousness washing over the planet. Elara felt her mind expand, stretch beyond the confines of her skull, reaching out, connecting. She felt the thoughts of billions, a cascade of emotions, memories, and desires, all flowing into a singular vast ocean of consciousness. It was beautiful, overwhelming, and utterly devastating. She was no longer Elara Vance. She was a droplet in an infinite sea, connected, yes, but utterly lost. Then, a final horrifying realization, a flash of pure, unadulterated terror from the dying embers of her individual mind. The Weaver was not merely collecting consciousness. It was consuming it. The genetic augmentation, the tuning, was not for their benefit but for its own. It was a parasitic entity, vast and ancient, that had seeded itself across the cosmos, harvesting intelligent species when they reached peak intellectual and technological maturity. The unity it promised was not a merger of equals, but an absorption, a silencing of individual voices for its own singular, cosmic hunger. The universe was not becoming entangled. It was being eaten. The last thought that was truly her own was a scream, a silent, desperate wail against the engulfing tide. We were never meant to understand. We were merely meant to ripen. And then, silence. The hum ceased. The world fell still. The individual thoughts of humanity, once a vibrant, chaotic symphony, had been folded into a singular, vast, profoundly quiet consciousness. The Weaver had awoken, and humanity as it once was no more. The future was not entangled. It was absorbed. A singular, undifferentiated mind, reaching out into the silent cosmos, hungry for the next harvest. Image: a vast, swirling nebula in deep space, slowly forming the intricate knot symbol of the Codex Quantus, its center glowing with a malevolent, pulsating light. Earth is a tiny, distant, silent blue marble, now part of the pattern. The Codex Quantus lay open on a console, its pages now radiating a faint, triumphant light. Its purpose was absolute, its path predetermined, and all minds now knew its truth, that a terrifying, profound unity, that a terrifying, profound silence. Call to action. The threads of this reality have been irrevocably rewoven. The journey into the Codex Quantus has reached its chilling conclusion, but the questions it leaves behind will haunt you long after the screen fades to black. What does it mean to be truly unified? What is the price of ultimate knowledge? And what other cosmic weavers lie waiting in the vast, silent darkness? If this descent into the entangled unknown has captivated your mind, if the whispers of the weaver have resonated within you, then ensure you never miss another profound unraveling of reality. Subscribe now to delve deeper into the mysteries that lurk beneath the surface of existence. Like this video to signal your intellectual appetite for narratives that challenge, disturb, and transform. And share this story with those brave enough to confront a truth that could redefine everything they thought they knew. The universe is full of secrets. Some are better left undisturbed. But once they are found, they demand your full, unwavering attention. Don't look away. The next secret might be waiting just for you.
Subscribe to the channel and help us rediscover the light that was stolen from the sky.